pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I beg your pardon?
Is the Zoom started?
Yeah, there's really,
There it is.
yeah.
It's green.
Okay.
So we opened both meetings with roll calls. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Should be happy to. Good evening, I'm Jim Riley, new superintendent of Wachusett Regional School District.
And I'm Michelle Grisey, the Director of Finance and Operations, Business and Finance for Wachusett Regional School District.
Okay, and while you speak, you want to speak up because, so the mic picks it up. Usually it only picks up swear words. So if you want to, give some positivity to it. Because there are people that are listening in on Zoom, and this is all being recorded by SLCT. Okay, so tonight's meeting is strictly about the school budget, which we actually met with you about 3 weeks ago, I think. Told us that the budget was actually just the first push. Yeah, when it came back to us a few days later, you forgot your erasers. So, would you like to start then?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. And appreciate the opportunity to talk about our schools and what we're hoping for in terms of funding. Wanted to share a little bit about where we are as a district. I think there's been a history with the school system that, especially in recent years, we haven't been as responsible as we need to be with our funding. Quite frankly, when I came in this year and then Michelle joined us at the end of November, we inherited a financial mess. And I think it's important to share some of that so people understand what we're dealing with, what our approach is and why. Just want to share in general what our financial goals are, what we're operating under. The first and foremost I just would share is that we're trying to budget and advocate for what kids need. And we're trying not to just recommend things like, hey, this would be nice to have. We're trying to base those recommendations on data and best practices. We're trying to do a better job in the district of being accountable and transparent. I don't think that's always happened, at least in recent history. We have to admit that we've made a lot of mistakes and we have to fix those mistakes. And it's not as simple, I would share with you all, as just fixing perhaps errors that were made. We really need to improve our systems. Extremely antiquated in what we do. We share this often. We have processes where we're still relying on carbon paper and forms get moved from one desk to another, leading to human error. We're also far too dependent on single sources. We we lost a lot of people, I'd say even before I arrived, and as those people left, we lost institutional knowledge, and it's made it very difficult for the school district to get back on track. And so we really need to make sure we don't have single points of failure. We need to come into current practices and electronic workflows, other things like that. There's lots of opportunities for us to get better. The piece I'd share with you here in Sterling is we're hoping to build some trust and form good relationships with our towns. I understand, and I can understand where you're going to say to me tonight, I'm saying this, but you don't believe me. I understand we're just one piece of the puzzle. I understand it's not all about the schools. I definitely think the schools are important. It's why I would do what I do. I think it makes a difference in kids' lives, and I'm really passionate about that. But I would also say that we should try to be good partners whenever we can and realize we're just part of the operating budget for the town and need to be responsible about that. What we're trying to do to build that relationship is look at untapped efficiencies. So there's, if I said to you, there's one area that I think Michelle and I are hoping that we can dig into further as we move along, it's getting to know, are there things in the budget that perhaps we can do better? Are there areas where we don't need to be spending as we are? We've done a little bit this year. We've looked at some of our leases and taken advantage of some opportunities there, but not nearly enough. And I wouldn't say to you, I have great confidence like, oh, we found a way to save $50,000 here or there. But I do think we have to have that responsibility. I think we have to make sure that we're trying to look for alternative funding streams. We've gotten a couple grants this year. I'll talk about it at the end of the presentation, but one of the things we're hoping to do, we've put in for a $50,000 grant for security improvements. That's earmarked for chalks at school. And so we're hopeful that that's going to get approved, and if it does, that would be something I think we'd be proud that we put forward. We recently got approved for about $100,000 from DESE to support one of our curriculums, and we're hoping to do more of that every year, to be honest with you, because I think we have to be looking for alternative funding streams, not always saying, hey, we need more money.
If you got a grant for Chopstick.
Excuse me,
Wait till the end.
All right. Not just wait till the end, but at this meeting, we raise our hand to be recognized. Okay, but I would let Mr. Riley continue until we get to the end. Write your notes.
I think the final thing, and what we're hoping, is allow the towns for time to plan. I think we're hoping not when we come forward with you, and one of the things we definitely need to do is develop our vision, engage in a strategic planning process. We're hopeful that when we do that, we can come and share, this is our vision, this is how we're hoping to get there, what we think the financial impact would be, and share that information. A lot of the things as we go along tonight, I'll share with you, we haven't tried to put forth things like these would be nice to have. A lot of the things we're putting forward, they really are supported by data, and they are in line with what we've committed to as a school district, and that's why we're putting them forward. And hopefully I'll help make the case why those things are necessary. Just want to, again, I alluded to, we're really in a difficult spot and inherited a lot of financial dysfunction. I'm happy to say the first one we've completed since we first gave this presentation 3 weeks ago, in that we've completed our FY21 audit, but it's kind of scary when you're planning for FY24 and you still haven't finished an audit for FY21. I think the other thing that was alarming when I took over is that it was estimated that we had overexpended our budget by about $1.65 million. I think the primary concern there, and I would share with you that some of the reasons why they went over, I understand. But if you're in a process or you got to be checking your budget. And if you think that you potentially may be going over, you really should be taking steps to make sure it doesn't get to that level if at all possible. Those over expenditures right now, at least in process, there have been balanced with our revolving accounts, although some of those transactions haven't actually gone through. And that puts us at financial risk moving forward if we were over again. And we were concerned, I'd share with you about our FY23 budget, how it was created, what it was based on. It wasn't a good process, and there was great fear. In fact, Michelle, after her first week with me, just said, Jim, we need to do a spending freeze. And we did. And we've done that because we don't want to get into a situation like we found ourselves in last year. We really do want to be responsible and understand that if we say this is what we need for a budget, this is what we should be living with. As I said a little bit earlier, it was a poor budget development process. I'll give you an example. Our salary line was simply multiplied, as far as we can tell, by 3%. And there are things in the teacher contract and other contracts where you have things like different lanes or steps where the increase could be more than that, it could be less, but you really should be doing true calculations to try to figure out what that is. And one of the things I would say that is great that Michelle's done since she joined us is she really did look at our actual expenditures in FY23 and FY22. And so when we present this budget, I think it's the first time, at least from what I can tell in several years at a minimum, that the district is saying this is what it's cost us to operate, and it's based on true data. It's not just taking a number from the year before and saying, oh, we'll put this out there. We're not at the point where all our line items are where we want them to be. We're not properly loaded in Munis, which is our operating system, for all of our line items. I think, and I hear this from Michelle all the time, we'll get there. And we need to be at that level, but the district hasn't, I think, engaged in that practice probably for 5 years now at a minimum. I think they did do it one time, but they really haven't done it over the last few years. And it's, how do you know what you're spending if it's not even loaded properly? So obviously that's a piece that we want to improve on in our practice. Things were so bad, or things were at such a point, where we, and we're still working on closing out FY22. We were notified by Department of Elementary Education and Secondary Education, Department of Revenue, that we were in risk because we had not finished or closed out our FY22 year, and we also hadn't certified our excess and deficiency, that we were at risk for losing funding. And Michelle and I actually meet every Friday morning with DESE and the Department of Revenue to update them on where we are, the progress we made, and when we're hopeful that we'll be able to get that reporting into them. They've been supportive. We appreciate their support, but I honestly, and I say this not because I'm here or Michelle's here, but I think if you had prior administration in these seats, I think the district would be in a lot of trouble. They're giving us grace and time, but we continue to watch that because it's a serious situation. I'd say the biggest, one thing I'd share with you, the biggest real impact we've seen of that is right now we don't have excess and deficiency. And the district needs approval from school committee to put excess and deficiency toward the budget, but that would be our recommendation to be able to do that. And right now we can't do that. We're trying very hard to work towards that. We'd like to make that possible if it is possible, but we want to acknowledge that. That's probably the biggest consequence we've had, besides meeting with DESE and DOR that takes up time. And poor Michelle's not thinking about FY24 and closing out FY23 properly. She's digging out from a fiscal year and a half where she had nothing even to do with it. But it's where we need to be for us to move forward. We are, I guess, proud of the first steps we've taken towards a better budget development process. Are we where we want to be? No, not even close. But it is a step forward, I think. We had a school committee budget retreat where we talked to the school committee. We talked about what our priorities were. We talked about our approach to capture what our true spending is in the district. And we also talked about what I shared before, in that we were going to concentrate on what we viewed as essential needs and not just put things out there that we know we want eventually, but not without a plan. And so I think that was helpful. Really appreciate school committee support because, it's one of those things that, they came in, they met with us on a Saturday and they spent the time, and I think they tried to give genuine input. And they also looked at all the requests, by the school principals and school departments. And Chris will tell you later, we weren't able to fulfill most of the requests from principals. I'd say 90% of them have gone unfilled. And it's not that they don't have value. I actually look at all the requests that the principals made, and I said, yep, I can see why they want that, and that would make a difference. But we're not in the position right now to move forward with all those things. And so one thing we did do this year is, in the past, they were collected, but they weren't shared with school committee or made public, and we've changed that. Because I think we have to know what our building principals are asking for. We have to know what our departmental leaders are looking for. Because they know best, really. They're the ones who are in the schools and with the kids. So I shared before, it was about, based on actual expenditures. And then the last thing I'd say is I do appreciate that the town managers reached out to us and said, look, this is what we think we can realistically afford, which was a 4% increase. I understand that what I'm presenting tonight is more than that. We will share that if we're able to get excess deficiency or other some means to bring it down, we think we would. In 4 of our towns reached the 4%, but we're not there yet. And part of my job as superintendent is really to advocate for kids and share what I really think we need. And that's what we're trying to do. It's not that I don't care and I don't want to listen, and I understand. Those aren't hollow words when I say I want to be a good partner. But at the end of the day, I got to look out for the kids. That's my main charge. So what have we developed? What have we said, hey, these are the things we really feel like are important for us to address? One of them is class sizes, and we have a school committee policy that says really this is what we're shooting for class sizes. I'd share with you in what you said that's particularly important. The reason why is because we don't have a lot of traditional supports that other school systems might. We're really heavily dependent upon our classroom teachers. And so if you deviate from those recommendations, it starts to have a real impact on kids. We also tried to look at inequities among schools. So are there some things that most schools or almost all schools have and other schools don't? We weren't able to address all of those. Like, honestly, Chris at Choxet right now is the only principal in the district. Well, we have two that don't have an assistant principal. And that's something we have to figure out and something we have to look at. Curriculum. We have a curriculum product that we're using in our elementary school that is not recommended for kids. It's Fontes Simpanel. There's been a lot of research that came out about it, especially in the last year and a half. And one of the things we're advocating for very hard is to choose a new curriculum product next year and start to implement it the following year, at least for K-2. And we're doing that because in some ways, a lot of people view the program as harmful, in that, especially for kids who may have, or potentially have things like dyslexia and other things. It's not based on, I talked about best practice. It's in research. The research does not support this program, and best practice certainly doesn't as well. And so we really need to fix that because I'm a big believer. Part of my history is working in early childhood. I think those years are critical. Pre-K to 2, 3. A lot of times you can predict how a child's going to do on what their experience is in those grades. And if they're not at a place where they're ready to fly, you end up providing additional services to get those kids over the hump. And I think we want to be a proactive district, not a reactive district, whenever possible. The other thing we have in here is increased departmental support. I'm going to share with you a little bit later about where we are. The district Wachusett today is not the district it was 15 years ago. And I think a lot of times people associate us with a lot of administrators, and that's not supported by the data. We actually don't have many administrators at all, and I'll share some of that with you tonight. The last piece I wanted to talk to you about is our facilities. We started the year, and it actually was under Linda Woodland, who's on us tonight in the call, and she's the subcommittee chair for our facilities and security, part of the school committee. And one of the things Linda led with us this summer was visiting every single facility in the district. We went to 13 schools. We looked at them with a keen eye as far as where are we? What are these buildings potentially need moving forward? In some cases, and this doesn't directly apply to Choxet and Houghton, where the physical, buildings have needs, but they're not. We have buildings, I'd say, in district right now that we're going to want to, if they bring it back, put in for the accelerated repair program at the Mass Building Authority. So we have a lot of buildings that may need roofs, windows, and boilers. And we want to be in a position when that does happen at Choxet or Houghton that we are taking advantage of that program, where what you will get back from that program is a much higher return rate than you would if you just funded it on your own. So we're trying to get our stars aligned so we're ready to say, hey, 5 years from now, we're going to qualify for this program. And right now, they've pulled the program for the accelerated repair just because the building costs have gone up so much, but they'll bring it back. And it really is a good program for towns to help support those essential needs for schools. But we've got a lot of aging buildings and systems. And it's not, in some cases, and I will share with you, we need to do better with our preventative maintenance on the district side. I think historically we've waited until things failed, and that's not a good way of going about things. And so we need to do better about that. But some of the stuff that's happening right now, it's just age. When a building gets to 25 plus, there's just going to be times that systems start to fail. And unfortunately in the district, we have a lot of buildings that are around that time frame, and so we got to be prepared when that starts to come to fruition. But I would share it, when we focused on those needs this year, there are a lot of things when I look at the district in Wachusett that I really think are important for us to consider. The term MTSS, which is really just having multi-tiered systems of support, is kind of a DESI term, but really what I would say is that right now, if a child is struggling, we don't have a lot of systems in place to help them other than asking the classroom teacher to do something else. And that's really hard. A lot of districts will have tutors or interventionists that can help support that child when they're struggling. And we are heavily dependent if you're not able to get the support, it's either the child continues to struggle. Sometimes they'll be found eligible for special education, but sometimes they're not. And you don't want to have a system where it's either you're found eligible for special education or you're not. Ideally, we're able to meet these kids when they're having issues and support them so they can get over that hump and start along their journey again. And we're able to do that in a timely manner. Right now, we're not poised to do that. It's a lot of the work we're doing with our leadership team is to start to talk about that process and what we could put in place to make that happen. Guidance I'd share with you, especially at the elementary level. We have 0.5 guidance counselors, which means we have half-time guidance counselors in all our schools. Most schools, almost all schools in Massachusetts at this time have one guidance counselor per school. We don't have health teachers at the middle school level. That's honestly another thing that you would see in most districts in Massachusetts. And then I had shared about the academic interventionists. We have a lot of work to do with special education. We're excited and we're about to start a search process for a new special education director. I think they're actually going to start to have some interviews next week. We need a special education vision. If I said to you, this is the vision of special education for the Wachusett Regional School District, I'd be lying, okay? Because I don't think we have a well-developed one, and that's something you have to develop. So that's an area we definitely want to work on. Expanded pathways. One of the things, and this wasn't us, this was actually teacher-driven. We have an innovative pathway grant that we got this year as well that high school teachers wrote for $75,000. And effectively what that's doing is offering other programs that aren't traditional in a school system. And what it might do, and what we're hoping it does, is allow us to get support to whatever you can do to make a child engaged in their education, you want to do. And so if we can have other things that are going to be of interest to kids and give them that hook and feel like they're invested in their education, we want to provide that. So that's kind of a nice thing that they've done. Space limitations, not as much here with Houghton and Choxa, where I think they're in nice shape, but there are towns in the district that are particularly struggling, and there's been rampant building. And I'm not sure we're prepared for that as a district. And so while that's not specific to Sterling, it is something that we need to keep our eyes on moving forward. And then the capital improvements, as I shared a little bit earlier, it's something that's going to come into play for some district buildings. So just wanted to share a little bit about the funding overview, and I hope people know, I think at times I bring up some of these things, and I'm not trying to be antagonistic with people, and I'm not trying to push buttons. What I am trying to share is on some of the data I've been able to look at, and we are traditionally provided by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Our funding isn't in alignment with what some other districts get. And so one of the indicators or metrics that DESE uses is per pupil expenditure. And when you use that metric, the Wachusett Regional School District, and everything I share with you tonight will be from FY21. And the reason why is because that's what's on the DESE website. That's the most recent data that we have available. So in FY21, and I would share it with you, our per pupil expenditure, we actually moved up. We did better in FY21 as compared to FY20, but in FY21 we were 364 out of 398 school districts. And so I think that's important to note. The other thing I would really want to note, and I'd have to look more exclusively about Sterling, how this has happened over time, but state funding, what the state is requiring districts or towns to support a school district, that can vary greatly. And one of the things that's happening in a lot of our towns is the state is looking at the towns and saying, this is the minimal local contribution for the district, but we feel the town can afford a greater percentage of that, and the state doesn't have to give as much. And in recent years, and here in Sterling, I think this is the case, you're very high in that, where you don't get the benefit of state dollars that a lot of other districts do. And that can make it hard. And that percentage, what the state figures, can change yearly. And it can cause some surprises. I think it's one of the reasons the budget is and the increase is so high in Rutland. It has to do with the number of students they've increased, but it also has to do with the fact that the state is looking at them and saying you can afford a greater percentage of your local minimum contribution. That's not something that the district has control over. It's just, it's their formula and their call. The last thing I wanted to share is like, the towns have been supportive of our budget. And so, the schools, we can't cry about, well, we didn't get what we feel like we needed if we didn't advocate for it. And if we didn't provide the data to say this is why we need it. And so, one of the reasons why we're trying to take a different approach to these presentations is so we can share with you how we're viewing things and to make our case. And it's not the member town's responsibility if the district didn't say this is what we think we need to use. And I'd share with you, we were over last year because of facilities, because of our salary lines and also our substitutes. And at least 2 out of those 3 were due to the pandemic, in that school systems had to put a lot more money into those substitutes and then also their facilities when COVID first hit. But that said, you got to communicate that, and you got to be able to explain why. And so just a little bit about per pupil expenditure. It's not a perfect metric. It is used by the state and they calculate it. I would say, as I said earlier, that a lot of communities, it looks like they're spending more per student, but that's supported more by the state than necessarily the community. And I think that's an important point to make. It was not used to build this budget. And so when I talk about per pupil, I don't want you to think like, oh, that's how we calculate what we need. We didn't. We based it on true expenditures. I think that those are important points. And then the other thing I want to acknowledge is our towns support our schools more than they have to. And so, all of our towns, we go above what the state says we have to spend. And so I certainly am not trying to say in any manner that the towns don't care about schools. That's not my intent whatsoever. So just a quick graph about where we are in per pupil expenditure. And I would share with you all that this is again from FY21. I don't know what it would look like for FY22, but I think it would be somewhat similar. For Wachusett, our per pupil expenditure in FY21 was $15,412. What we did is we made a couple of comparables. One of them was we used our DART peers. DART peers are districts that are similar size, have a similar demographic makeup, so similar educational needs, at least on paper. Locally, I think the closest comparable district would be Shrewsbury that they use for us. When you take all of those peers and you average out what their per pupil expenditure is, it's $17,381, or almost $2,000 more than we're spending per student. When you look at other regional schools, and so we took all the other K-12 regional schools in the state, and we average what they're spending for per pupil expenditure. They're over $18,500. I put up Bay Path and Monty Tech here too. It's a different model, and so I'm not saying it's great comparable, but it is, just to share with you, these are what these programs are able to say they spend per student. Michelle knows more about per pupil expenditure than me, and again, I'm by no means an expert. I think one of the things I would share that the district can do in terms of per pupil expenditure is at the end of the year, what they do is they look at what you've spent. I think we have to, and not all expenses qualify and they're seen as directly supporting student achievement. I think what we need to do as a district is look at, are we making sure that what we're spending our money on is directly impacting kids? And that's a way that we can help with the per pupil expenditure and to make sure it's not considered a non-essential expense towards kids. And so I just want to acknowledge that, because it's not all about how much money you get. Sometimes it's a little bit about how you spend it. All right, and so just a couple of quick things. If we had per pupil expenditure similar to our DART peers, it'd be $2,000 a student. That's $13,600,000. I'm not asking for that. It's not even saying that, but I am saying that's glaring when you look at what the difference it would make in the budget. Similar with our K-12 regional peers. There it's almost 3,000, that's almost over 20 million, or it is over 20 million. I share all that because when I talk about where we are at Wachusett schools and how we're built to support our kids, I get nervous. we're not built, in my mind, to support the evolving needs of our students. We're not. The kids, their needs right now are greater than they have been in a very long time. I worry about the kids social emotionally, I worry about them academically, and you can see in our data, just looking at our data from last year, we're losing ground. The state's losing ground too, but I would say that in some areas, the difference between Wachusett and the state, it's getting closer. And we've been a high-performing school district, and I think we want to stay there. But I get nervous when I look at the way we're built right now, that our system is saturated. And so what we're asking people to do as the needs as they increase, I'm afraid that we don't have the things in place to help support kids. And we're all hurting, I think, coming out of the last 3 years, but our kids are especially hurting. So last one I'm going to show you, we're big, all right? We're the 25th largest district in the state. And what this is, it's kind of a scatter graph in terms of where do we fit in terms of per pupil expenditure for the 25 largest districts in the state, and we're last right now. So town assessments, I think it's important to just share what does impact them, because it's not always our ask. Some of the things that go into the town assessment are things that are determined by matters that are out of our control. And so, as I shared earlier, the town shares of minimal net school funding, a lot of times that true calculation is by the state saying, okay, Sterling, this is what you can afford, so this is how much of this number we're going to expect you to pay. That's not something we have control over. Your student enrollment by town, it's been pretty flat here, but that has happened to a couple of our towns, so you get a lot more students than your proportional share by the regional agreement. That's going to change, and that's going to affect your town assessment. The last thing I'd share, and we are in control of that, is our discretionary ask. And so I think in the past, the district used to call it operational costs, and I guess you could view them as operational costs, but it's really discretionary. It's asking you for money that you don't have to give us. The state's not saying that's what our minimal local is. And so I think we have to be honest. Like, that's money that we're asking for. It's money that we think we need, but it's money that the towns aren't obligated to provide. So just some things I think are important about this budget and what it's been based on. The governor's initial budget that got put forth in February included additional Chapter 70, which is great, and transportation aid for the Wachusett School District. We're still not funded as a regional to the level that was promised. That continues to be an issue, but I think there has been some progress made towards that. And I do think we have supportive representatives, and I think they do care. We're actually meeting with them tomorrow, which is nice. Minimal local contributions, I think we have to acknowledge that they've increased for all of our towns. And that's difficult when that happens. It already puts us behind the 8 ball in terms of our percentage increase. And the last thing I think we want to be transparent about is right now, we haven't been able to include excess and deficiency in this budget. It's not listed as a revenue source. And we know that has an impact on the percentage increase that we're asking for. And so just a little bit about the district, because it's funny, like these are wonderful towns that we provide service to. But because of the size of our towns, sometimes we lose maybe sight of how big the district actually is. And we're the largest regional school district in the state of Massachusetts. Our student enrollment is 6,739. That actually went up. That was based in October this year, but we went up in May. We actually added even more students. We have 155 square miles covered in our district. It's gigantic. And as I shared earlier, it's in the top 6%, 25th biggest district in terms of enrollment. 13 schools, 5 towns. We have 1,400 active employees. Active employees doesn't mean full-time employees. That includes like coaches, people who might do stipends or perform other positions for us. We do have 569 teaching positions in the district. And when you look at it, in terms of full-time positions, it'd be about 1,080, 1,079. One nice thing I would say about the district is 881 of our employees live in our district. and I think that typically is a very nice thing. It shows an investment by them. I think they truly care about the schools, and that's an equivalent of about 631 full-time equivalency positions. And so just looking at Sterling in particular, our enrollment or your enrollment this year based on our October 21 or October 22 SIMS reporting, right? Basically, we take every child in the school, we verify that they're residents of the certain towns, and we send that to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Sterling this year makes up 13.31%. We lost 8 students over the previous fiscal year. But for the most part, it's been staying, fairly consistent. At the high school, interestingly, you actually added 5 students, and so they were at 269 in 21. In this past year, we were at 274, which is a nice trend. I think we want to hopefully hold on to our kids when they go into high school. Hopefully, they see our high school as a viable option and a place where they want to go. So we're hoping to continue that trend. So our draft budget, what does it include? It includes 8 class size adjustments, and I'm going to go through those. 2 of those class size adjustments are in the town of Sterling that we're proposing, and I'll show you the data behind that. An English language learner teacher, and I can show you the data behind that. And then also two school counselors. It includes a curriculum director. When I talk about Fontes and Pinnell needing to be replaced and us needing a new ELA literacy program, English language arts, sorry, I did that in another presentation. So English language arts just basically, supporting learning how to read. That program, we'll look at the data for administrators. We really need somebody who can concentrate. We have an excellent person who helps support Title I, but we really have that position in our deputy superintendent who are supporting curriculum, and in a district our size, that is not the norm. And then, as I shared earlier, we'd look to support the implementation or at least the selection of a K-2 curriculum. Facility improvements, we all own, all the towns support our early childhood center, which provides services to 3 to 5-year-olds who could use or benefit from supports. They qualify for special education. Research shows that that's really one of the best times to intervene in kids' life. And so that program actually is with us in central office, and I'd share that that's one of the buildings I'm most concerned about in the district. And so included in this budget is money towards replacing floors at the ECC. Right now they have rugs that are in excess of 15, 20 years old, and quite frankly they're disgusting and not appropriate for kids. And so we'd like to tile them and make them more hygienic for kids to use. And then the other thing is the ECC is the only building in the district that does not have an emergency generator, and that's tough when you have your youngest kids. It already is an old building, we actually share that physical plant with them, and at one point earlier this year we had a tree fall on Main Street and took out a power line, and when it did so, the district had a little bit of battery backup. When that went down, we lost internet in several of our schools, because that's where the system feeds out of, and that's not a good situation for us to find ourselves in. So just to talk about how it applies to Sterling specifically and the data we're basing that on, 2 of the classes that we've identified for requesting additional teacher at Houghton, one of them is a grade K class, and so right now if we didn't provide an additional teacher at Houghton for kindergarten, your class size would be over 24. That's high. The recommendation for school committee is 19, and so we'd be 5 above the recommendation from school committee. If we made that adjustment, we'd be slightly below the recommendation. We'd be at 18.3, and so probably that means two classes with 18 and 2 and 19, and that's assuming there aren't any move-ins, which could quite possibly happen, but that's why we're recommending that class size. And then there's another classroom at Houghton that we're recommending. This is a 4th grade classroom. If we don't make an increase, that 4th grade classroom would have a class size of 26. That's high. The recommendation for a school committee policy is 22, so we'd be 4 above that. If we do make that adjustment, they'd come down to 19.5. It's hard, and one of the things in the schools, especially here in Sterling, and we honestly try to protect the schools, both, Chalks does well on class sizes, but you have to be careful because the school's at a certain size, you want to have some minimum staffing to make sure the kids are getting the experience. And, I know Chris, if he spoke, he'd advocate, like he wants people, especially in middle school, to be teaching in their content area and not out of that, because that's the area they went to school for, they're licensed for, and they're have expertise in. And that's something that we are trying to continue to do in Chalks to support them as well. So just so, to be transparent again, we are actually reducing some classes at schools as well. And so we don't use the policy just one way. We don't go, oh, hey, look, we're over here, we need to add a teacher. If we look at the numbers and we say, you know what, we don't need this teacher, we make adjustments there too. And, these are just 4 of the classrooms across the district who we're actually removing a teacher. And so even, if you looked at the previous page, we actually had 12 positions, but it's really 8 additional positions because there's an efficiency here where we're reducing a section at a school. Right now, these adjustments, none of the schools that are being reduced are in Sterling. So we also are recommending an English learner education teacher. You're required by the state and Department of Education to provide certain services if a child is an English language learner. The recommendations by the state or by DESE are that you provide 473 hours for our 131 students. Right now we're at 387. If we were able to add an additional position, we'd cut that gap in half. We still wouldn't be where the state recommends, but we'd make progress towards it. And again, we're trying to be conscious and not ask for things like, hey, this would be nice to have. These are things that we're not in compliance with recommendations, and we're trying to make sure we move towards being so. This other one I'd share with you too is about our counselors. I talked about how most schools at elementary have full-time counselors. This is just some data of what people recommend. In Massachusetts, it's about an average of 1 counselor for every 362 students. The national average is about 408 students to every counselor. Here in Wachusett right now, it's 539 students to 1. All right, so we're well above the national average and the state average. If we were able to add these 2 counseling positions, we'd get a lot closer to where we want to be. We'd be at about 440 to 1. So again, we wouldn't, we're not trying to, be crazy, and we're not asking to be at the Massachusetts average. The first one is the recommendation by, I think, the School Counselor Association. But we are trying to make progress and address the fact that we're not where I think ideally we want to be, especially with increased needs for our kids. I think part of the problem when you look at counselor ratios is a lot of what our counselors are able to do right now are deal with kids in crisis, and ideally what you're able to do with your counseling program is you're able to support all kids. You're able to get your counselors in the program, you're able to talk to them about how we're getting along with other social skills, other things, other skills that are going to help them as they move forward in life, and not only have a counselor go to the kids in crisis. I think one of the hard things about how we're staffed right now is sometimes we have kids in crisis and we don't have somebody to necessarily work with them. And it falls on an administrator or somebody else in the building. The other thing I want to put out there, and again, I'm not asking to be where some of these other programs are, but when you look at, and this is again from DESE, okay, so this is provided by the state, our ratio of students to administrators is 163 to 1. Our DART peers, so those districts that are similar to us, they have 121 students to 1. Our border districts, which would be, if you take our 5 towns and every town that touches our 5 towns, their average is 117 students to 1 administrator, and the state average is 100 students to 1. I'm not asking for any of that. I am thinking, though, that we really do need somebody to help support our curriculum. We're not built right now to support curriculum. And so I just want to make, one final point, or one of my last points, hopefully, is that we didn't, the principals gave us a lot of positions that they were asking for. And as I shared earlier, I think they're all legitimate. I look at them and I say, yep, I can understand why you would want that. But we haven't put them in this budget. We haven't oh my gosh, this is what people want, so this is what we have to have. I feel like, and I talked about being good partners, I talked about sharing our vision, I'm preparing time to plan. We got to do some work in the district. We have to become better aligned, right? We can't have 13 different schools taking 13 different approaches to education because of, and it's tough here in the district because we have so many different models. We had a K-8 school at Thomas Prince in Princeton. We got a K-8 school at Paxton Center School. You have a unique model here where you've got a split between Houghton and Choxet, but it's two schools. It's not the same as the three schools you have in Rutland, and they really have three leveled, or really two levels that they approach it with at Holden. So it's hard to get there, but we have to. It's one of the things we had a principals meeting today, and it's one of the things we're spending time on. We've got to have some alignment between our schools where we're taking a similar approach to education. Our forms look the same. We have the same conversations, and then ideally we can look and approach our staffing the same, and say this is how we want to move forward. And so we know we have some work to do, and it would be very hard. This list would have been a very slippery slope. I don't know how I would say, well, this school really needs this, but this school doesn't. I don't think we have the data to support that yet. But we're hoping as we move forward that we'll have that for you, and we'll have some ideas about hopefully how we can move forward. And that's it. So unless switch seats, you good?
No, I'm probably good. If you just want to switch, I can look up that.
Okay, how about before we switch, Michelle, we take a little bit of a break to see if anybody has any questions
Sure.
for the superintendent.
Sure.
I was going to go with the select board first, if you don't mind, Mr. Ross.
That's totally fine. Happy to wait.
We're not really at numbers yet.
Great presentation. I just wish, I'll hold a couple of questions for the end, but I was thinking as you were going, it'd be nice if this presentation could be at every annual town meeting in the district, and it can't, just for time constraints, but it should be, because it really lays out there, the numbers. And when you look at it, 50% of the whole thing is teaching services, and when you put in an average of 22 students per classroom, I think that's what we want. We don't want 30 students per classroom. So and the increase in the student salary, the teacher salaries is 3.7%. I wrote that down somewhere. I don't think that's outrageous. Some of the other percentage increases, I might as well just go and do it, get it over with, like Maureen, just do it now. Which, I think people need to know. Benefits and insurance are approximately 9.5% over the prior year. Instructional support, it's not the biggest number, but it's 23%. I suppose people will ask at town meeting, where can we cut? Operations and maintenance, maybe that's an area, I don't know. Operations and maintenance, 10.5%. Again, I do want to preface all this, I should have, by saying that, we're in an unusual economic situation here in the country, with inflation at 9.1% as of December and 6%, 3 times higher than it was 2 years ago. We all get that. There's other, there's a decrease in special ed, pupil services, these are small numbers. Transportation, 13% increase. Overall increase, 6.53%. After listening to the presentation, I understand. I do understand why it comes out to that number, and yet we're going to get people that are going to say, well, that's too high. Of course, Sterling's assessment is 4.91%. People will say, well, we have flat enrollment. Why are we going up 4.9%? Well, if they had this to look at, I think they would say, I'm not saying things can't be cut perhaps in operations and instructional services, but 3.7% is 50% of the budget. And that's contractual, and that's, given where we, the economy we're in today, that is really reasonable, in my opinion, in my own opinion. people do want cuts. They, I don't know what the other towns are probably facing more challenges than us. We'd love it to come in at 4%. We've got our own municipal budget under 4%. Given all the numbers, we're looking at about a 5% hike on the average tax bill, which comes off a 6% hike last year, 0 the year before, and about 3% for 5 years before that, which is not bad. But people forget, what have you done for me today is the old adage. And it would be good, I'm just telling you now at town meeting, I wish they had the whole presentation. I would just encourage people to look at this video, to get these numbers before coming to town meeting, so they're educated, they have information like we do, and I think they'll know. You can look at this and yeah, pick a few things here and there, no question. You have access to the individual minutia of the data, we don't, but from the big picture, the overlook at 6.51, yeah, we'd love it to come down a little bit. We understand where you're coming from. You inherited an interesting situation, to put it mildly. And in a normal year, the numbers aren't unreasonable, in my opinion. But you're still going to get a challenge at town meeting. People do want their taxes under control. I get it. I understand it. If there's any way to cut some of this, again, without affecting the classroom size, I think that's what we're going to. Those are the requests you're going to get. And I can't tell you. I don't have the answers to what I would do, where I would cut it, but. Great presentation, it puts it all out there, and but I think I would still say to you, suggest that somehow or other, if there are other areas that I know maybe kicking stuff down the road, but if there are other areas that can be cut, it may behoove you to try to do so in order to sell this for all the towns in May. But I don't think it's unreasonable. I truly don't. That's my spiel. So,
David?
I apologize for being late to the meeting, first of all, but I just have one question. You made a statement where if the class size is reduced, you remove a teacher. So is that teacher removed from?
The district? So typically what will happen is they get reassigned. And so, like on there are actually 12 class size adjustments that we're proposing. Like you add a teacher to a certain grade level, right? And all of these that we put out there are in the K to 6 range. A lot of them, you can take a teacher, like those teachers that we're reducing by, we'd change their grade level. So you might take a 2nd grade teacher and they become a 3rd grade teacher. You know what I mean? Like there's a wash in those 12 positions. And so, no, we're not eliminating those. We're making 12 class size adjustments. Like on the slide, you'll actually see there are 12 teaching positions that we're saying we need an additional section here. But then those other 4 on the next page, we're saying we don't need as many sections in here. And so we're going to go down, like we're going to go from 4 teachers down to 3. What we typically do, especially for elementary teachers where the licensure, you can typically teach from K to 6 or 1 to 6. You have flexibility, so you can take somebody even though maybe they haven't taught 3rd grade before and taught 1st grade before, you can move them and make a couple adjustments. Where it would get tricky, what I would say to you is we're asking for 8 additional teaching positions, even though it's, the adjustments go on both sides. And so, but those people won't lose their positions, they just would teach a different grade level that has a need that's on that first page. Sorry, that wasn't a good answer, but.
Thank you.
Mr. Austin?
Yes, just pause. So to follow on to that question, so we're reducing the FTEs. So when you say they're going to be reassigned, is it possible that they go to a different school?
Yeah, we're going to have to look at it. And so where it is, I think, a challenge, and we're going to have to work with this teachers union. It's hard to tell right now because you don't know if there's natural attrition. Every year we're going to lose some staff members that we don't necessarily anticipate losing. And so it's hard to answer that. I would say that's another piece of the district that we have to do a better job wrapping our heads around. I think that the more stability we can build in, I would hate, and I don't think we're going to get as good an experience from our teachers if every year they're wondering, what town am I going to be teaching in? You know, the bottom line is teachers are a very valuable part of a culture, and if you're moving them every year, that's really difficult. That said, if we don't have a need for a teacher in a school, yeah, we're going to have to work with the union about, we're going to have to move a teacher to cover it. And like at Houghton, right now, Houghton doesn't have any efficiencies, right? And so those, and he may, and we may, right? Because these other adjustments we don't have to make, it may be like, oh, you know, Mr. Cipro, you can hire. Or we may have to work with them and say, we have to make an adjustment here.
Well, the reason I ask is, I've dealt with a lot of union contracts over the years. Not with teachers, but a lot of union contracts of different kinds. Probably a little bit rowdier people than you're accustomed to. But anytime you deal with union contracts, I mean, it's nice to put a slide out that says we have 4 numbers, but not necessarily true, because you have to deal with those contractual issues, and that may limit your ability to actually effectively manage those 4 slots. Yeah, I understand. And then another question I have is around the counselors. So I noticed your statistics, a lot of times you use like a single data point. You're saying, well, based on this ratio and it's recommended ratio, we want this. However, you recommended 2 counselors. So have you thought of a phased approach where you say, maybe we do 1 counselor, we do the onboarding process, and we push the counselor out to the following fiscal year? Have you considered that option?
The counselor piece, what I'd share with you is, I think the schools we're looking at, so at one point in the beginning, we haven't identified the specific schools, but I could tell you what we're thinking. So right now at Mount View and Holden, they have 1 counselor for over 700 students. And so that's one place where we would try to get an additional counselor because that's really an outlier in terms of how we're approaching supporting kids' social emotional needs. We also have an elementary school right now that has less. So when you look at mental health support, sometimes you look at school psychologists and guidance counselors combined. There's a school we also have that doesn't have the same total FTE under supports as other ones. It's 0.5 less than other ones, and that would be one that would be earmarked as well. And so I'd share with you, and I'm not, like, where do I want to be? I want to be with 1 counselor for every elementary school. You know, that's what my hope would be long term, because I think that's what our students deserve and what they would be benefited from. But you know, one thing I would share with you, because I think it's an accurate question. I'm putting all this out here, and I would expect for people to ask me what happened to those 4 teachers, or you know, and I think school committee's going to hold me accountable, and they should. Like, show us what happened here. Tell us where these positions, if the budget passes, where they were added and where they weren't. And did we effectively, you know, I've got a lot of these classes earmarked for an adjustment, but we don't know what's really going to happen. This is somewhat based on projections, and we may have, you know, Houghton right now, K and 4th may be the one that looks the worst, but it takes 1 or 2 families, and all of a sudden another grade level is an even greater need. And I got asked that question when we presented to school committee, what are you going to do if you have more kids move in? And it may not be those you know, 8-12 recommendations. It might be a different one, because we're going to have to take it case by case. I think what I'd acknowledge, though, is it's a finite budget. You know, and that's partly where we ran into trouble the other time, where we just weren't looking as closely as I think we need to be in terms of what we're spending. And so we wouldn't, and honestly, now looking at the town meeting dates, I'm not sure effectively we can execute any of these hirings until we have surety that we're going to have the funding to add them. And if that's the case, then we really be looking at June and data at that time about, okay, where do we sit? Where do we think we need people? Not a great way, I'll be honest with you, to hire teachers. Ideally, you're doing that now, or now through May. But it's the reality, and you know, what we don't want to do is add a position and not have the funding for it. So.
Just one more comment or question. Is this, when we originally talked about the budget, we took using the metrics around how much we pay per student. Right? Okay, it's a mathematical equation, right? That we have this X number, we divide, and we say that's that. But for me, there should be multiple points, data references. Right? What are the most critical points of reference in around school? Graduation rates, ACTs, SATs, MCAS, all those to me, there should be some performance correlation between what we're spending, what we're seeing, and I haven't seen that in the budget. And I know you have your hands full. I understand that. I totally respect that. But for the future, it will be nice to see some correlation between performance and pay. And it's not exact science, but more data points to help guide those decisions.
Yep, totally agree and completely understand. And to your point too, I'm hoping in the future, because I know per pupil expenditure, I think it can, I don't know if it's controversial, but people feel differently about it. I would hope to have other data points that kind of talk about what we're looking at. And I'd be happy to share. I don't have it on this, and it's hard to. Data is always a year behind in schools. And so if you ask me how we're doing right now, I don't know, and we won't, not that MCAS is the perfect, prescriptive tool, but, we're typically a year behind, but I would agree with you, and I think partly what I would love to add in the future is like, hey, this is why I'm concerned or not, or you know what, we're doing all right, and that's great, because that's the news I'm hoping to share.
And a good way is a 5-year trend line.
Yep.
You have a 5-year trend line.
Yeah.
You don't have to be exact that year, but it's going to give you a pointer. It's going to point right.
I'll tell you though, one of the biggest frustrations for us in education is the data we've gotten the last 3 years has not been good, and that we didn't have consistent testing and assessment, and so, hey, I didn't see what I'm sorry, I didn't see it earlier. That's something that we are going to struggle with the next couple of years. Because it's unknown, it's not as clear and defined as it had been moving forward. And even the MCAS data, when you look at, we were talking about this today, we were looking at our 10th graders, right? And their scores aren't where we would traditionally see them. However, you also have to realize that they only were there for part of 8th grade, really none for another year, and they hadn't taken the assessment in 3. And so what kind of impact does that have? And so, but I hear all your points.
Lynn, you have a question?
Yeah, I have several actually.
On this portion of it.
Yeah, on the PPE, do those numbers affect reimbursement in any way, shape, or form? And is transportation included as part of the per pupil cost? Do you know?
They actually take, I'm not sure, I don't think transportation is included, because they're taking, well, on the DESI numbers?
Oh, no.
No, on the DESI numbers, I don't think that it is. They take three codes from the end of year report that we haven't submitted yet. Why it's 2021 data is because they haven't gotten all of the FY22 data from all of the school districts. So we file a financial report. So they have certain codes that they are taking, instructional line codes, that they are taking to calculate that per pupil information.
And does it any way affect our state aid or what we get back?
Well, when we file that report, there's definitely information that they're grabbing from that report, like the regional transportation reimbursement. We file a schedule of that report, it's called Schedule 7, that guides what they're reimbursing for transportation. So they're looking at regular education costs, so that you only get reimbursed for that, and then ridership above 1.5 miles. So we report all that information. So yeah, that financial report, they are basing reimbursements on what we are
I guess my
providing.
question is, if our per pupil costs were better, would that increase our state aid in any way?
No, not necessarily.
think so.
Yeah.
They have their
No,
own
what-
formula.
Yeah, like they're getting, DESI over the years has gotten so much data, even in the form of like all the student reporting, the SIMS reporting, the EPIMS reporting on the people that work within district. They have so much data, and they're taking that and providing some ratios that they create, so that we can try to make decisions and inform ourselves on, like, what could, like Jim said, those numbers can actually make us look and say, hey, are we putting this stuff in the right buckets? Like, should we realign? Like, it's not, but it's really for comparison purposes to see where we stack up against other districts in the Commonwealth.
And do you include the pre-K in that thing? Because a lot of schools don't offer pre-K, right?
So the pre-K is a special ed program.
Yeah.
And then you have a part of our pre-K that people pay to go there. So when they're calculating the foundation budget, which I'll talk about in a minute, they don't include paid kids who are paying to go to the preschool. That's not part of our enrollment there. And they're getting enrollment information, when they're calculating it, they're getting enrollment information that they get from that Sims reporting, and they use it to be consistent among all districts in the Commonwealth.
Is special ed treated totally separate? Like, is it not included in your per pupil costs? And is it like calculated differently or,
No, they
segregated
would
out?
include, in that metric, I'm thinking they're including special ed as well as regular ed,
And
yes.
how does that work in our schools? Do we have a separate special ed classroom, or is it just pull kids out of class and give them some additional?
No, our special ed, it varies. You probably, Jill, I should let you speak on this,
Well,
sorry.
I mean, I think it's, we typically, we have some separate programs that are exclusively made up of special education students. They might do what they call reverse inclusion, where they may attend certain periods or events with other students if they're able to. We also have an inclusion model at times where kids are in the classroom with the teacher and they get support as needed. We have, and when I talk about special education as an area where we can improve our vision, we've committed a little bit to co-teaching, and co-teaching is you have a teacher and then you have a special education teacher and you have all the students in and people have different responsibilities. But I would say I think it's inconsistent in how it's applied across the district right now. It means different things in different schools, and that's why I share that. Like, I think special education is really important for us as we move forward as a district. We have to define that. Ideally, we're using similar models wherever possible. We can talk about, hey, this is how we do it in Wachusett. We do it this way because this is why it's accepted best practice, and we're looking at data, right? And saying, this is what our data says, is that we've improved because we're doing it this way. We're mindful of cost too. You have to be, you can't, we'd all love certain things, but the bottom line is they're not always going to be feasible.
Are we the only school district that splits like Choxet and Houghton versus K through 8?
In here, no, we have two K-8 schools, Princeton and Paxton Center. What are you? You're 5 to 8, right?
5, so we're the only district, Choxet is the only middle school in the district that has 5th grade as part of their middle school. The other middle schools are 6 through 8 or K to 8.
Do you have a preference for one model versus the other?
I don't know enough about it, you know what I mean? I do feel like they all have unique, would I like there to be more consistency in how we approach it? Yeah, I would. And I don't know, we're gonna, that's one of the exciting things, honestly, about trying to do a strategic plan, is you have an opportunity to look and redefine how we are. Really interesting in the district right now, where we're looking at Holden is going to be increasing in size. Rutland's really going to be increasing in size from what we can tell. And Sterling, Paxton, Princeton have been more stable, and in some cases have even gone down and lost some students. And so there's an opportunity about, you don't want to be adding teachers in towns because you want to have maintain accurate class sizes, where we have other schools that have extremely low class sizes, and it's like, if I'm from one of those towns, I'm looking and saying, okay, where's the equity here? We're not giving similar experiences. So one of the opportunities I think we have as a district is, how can we do that? It happened at Thomas Prince, I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I don't have a great look at the history, but at one time that school was in danger of not being sustainable because they were so low, and the school went to kind of a school choice model where you could say, I want to go to Thomas Prince. And, we're not able right now to support busing for a decision like that. We should be looking at that, to make sure our schools are at a level where we can have the school experience be what we want it to be, but, and we don't have to make adjustments. Like, it gets, what do you do when you have two, class sizes that are at like 15, 14, 13, right? At that point, can you continue to say, well, that's fair? But can you say it's fair if you're removing a teacher, and like the example I gave at Choxit, that that person isn't teaching under their license or area that they're an expert in? Well, then, the kid who goes to Choxit's not getting the same experience necessarily as a child who goes to Mount View or Thomas Prince. And so it's complex. It's one of the things that's really unique about the district. We're using so many different models at all of our schools. But it's definitely an area we have to wrap our heads around because each town's going to be dealing with a different challenge.
Do you anticipate getting excess and deficiency before the end of fiscal '24?
I have great confidence in Michelle, and that when she's able to get us out of this mess, I'm not going to be coming to you again and saying we didn't have excess and deficiency certified. I think if Michelle shares the district she just came from, when did you get it done? November?
Yeah.
Yeah, so she got it done in November in the district she came to us from.
So-
And so, no, I don't think that's going to happen again. I think right now with DESE and DRR, when we meet with them on Fridays, their hope is that we're going to have it done by April 15th. I don't know if we will, and I think Michelle's really careful. I can't tell you how many bank reconciliations, over 400?
We had 400 reconciling, 400 items that are not on our ledger.
Instead of
That we're working on.
hoping to put it back to the budget, have you considered earmarking some things that are discretionary, let's say, and I know you want them all, and putting those off until you get the excess and deficiency? Rather than saying, okay, I'm going to put it back to the budget after the fact, can you just take that amount out of the budget and say, okay, we're going to earmark these things that we want to do for those monies when they come in, as we hope they will?
That would be up to school committee to decide ultimately, so.
And I'm not sure, I don't think they can request more, right? They can only approve less, or is that not? I thought that was the case.
So for a town assessment, what happens is we put forth an assessment, we can't come to you after and ask for more.
Right, and ask for more.
We
I
can only
understand.
pull back and say, hey, we need less.
Right.
So
it's kind of a gamble on your part that this excess and efficiency is going to come in, but if you count on it coming in, then, and you use it to budget discretion.
We're not counting on it coming in.
You can, right?
yeah, I can't count.
We're not,
I-
it's a gamble.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
hopefully
so-
we win, but if
Yeah.
we don't,
Yeah.
And then my other question,
Lynn?
similar. Oh, I'm sorry. You asked me if I had questions.
I didn't ask you for 20 questions.
Oh,
Is it a question that nobody's asked yet?
yes. It was the first one I tried to ask about grants. You said you hoped grants would be coming in, and and one of the grants you mentioned had to do with something we're budgeting for capital in Sterling. Would that come back to Sterling if you got the
So
grant?
what we did, when we went down and toured the buildings, one of the things we saw is we really need to look at our security infrastructure in our schools. A lot of our schools don't have cameras. We're using antiquated key systems. We're not using fob systems. The danger there is once keys get out, you sometimes don't get them back. And so it's time for the district to do a reset in terms of how we get into our school and control our entrances. And then I think the cameras, we meet every month with our police and fire chiefs, meet with the town managers on a monthly basis as well. And one of the things we've been talking about all year is we're really hoping to address the security of our facilities moving forward. And we knew there had been an announcement from the governor in August that they were hoping, or they had mentioned, bringing forward some grant possibilities to help support school security. And so it's why when we made capital improvement requests this year, and Sterling's been great to us. We replaced the tiles we got rid of carpeting and put the tiles in at Choxit. We're scheduled to do that at Houghton this year as well during the summer. When we put forth the request for security, we were hoping that this grant was going to come through. It did. And so we applied for it, I want to say about a month ago. A district can apply for up to $150,000 across 3 schools. We chose a school in Sterling, we chose a school in Rutland, and we chose a school in Holden. and figured that was the most equitable way to do it. That school here is Choxet. And so we don't know if we've gotten it yet. And one of the final slides on this presentation will show you what we're requesting for securities, but it would pretty much cover what we're asking for at Choxet. There still would be a request for Houghton, but it would put us on par, or at least have a really good foundation of improving the security in our schools, which is important. It's important.
So has the capital request changed at all since what we got?
It's and so on the last, we haven't heard yet about the grant, and so I'll show you what we're estimating it would be to do that work at both. And I think we're hopeful that we're going to hear that. We'd know by town meeting if we've gotten that grant. So.
Sue, do you have anything to throw in?
I just wanted to make a comment, John, I really appreciate it.
Introduce yourself.
Sue Valentine, I happen to be on the school committee, I'm new this year, I just came on board in May. This whole process has been quite illuminating. Dr. Riley is awesome. His commitment, his dedication, the thoroughness, the teamwork here, and Michelle coming on board. Every time we went to a school committee meeting, it seemed like we were hit with another surprise. And so, I think that you can tell from the presentation the amount of work that went into pulling this budget together. So John, not that you have to answer now, but how can we educate the public? What can we do to get the townspeople of Sterling on board so they understand what went into this, what we were dealing with, what the obstacles
All
were?
right, you're right, that's not a question for now, and we can talk about that, Sue.
Okay.
I really do want to give Michelle a chance to go through her presentation. So we talked about grants and that you've applied for them, and you also had sent us something about a capital funding, and then you withdrew it. You withdrew it saying that you would look for other funding sources. I'm guessing those other, and I'm hoping those other funding sources are the grants that you're looking at?
Yeah,
As opposed to having it in this, taking anything out of this budget, because it doesn't feel like you can take anything out of here.
Yeah, I think what we realized, and we didn't have the time to have an understanding of how much it's going to cost.
Okay.
And I will be honest, of all the capital improvements, it's not that it's not needed at the high school. It's that what were put forth and what we built into the budget at the ECC, that was the most important district need. And so I think we're going to look to try to support it. Yes, it would be through grants or other programs or whatever we can find for efficiencies. But we're not going to ask. I think we're also realizing that towns asked us to come in at 4 and we're coming in at 5. And, it's at some point.
You're going to come in at 4, right?
But there is no surprise like we're adding this or anything like that. No.
Okay.
The capital improvement requests are the two elementary schools. I mean, the elementary school in Choxet, and they're around security. There isn't going to be another request in terms of capital improvement for district buildings.
Okay, because in that request that you've now withdrawn was an intercom system at the high school. In this day and age, is that really, I would want you to look at it.
Yeah,
In this day and age, do you really need an intercom system?
Yeah, and
Everybody's got a phone.
right, and I think it really is more phones, a whole electronic kind of suite, what they're looking for. And so I'll look into that because I don't want to misspeak to you, but I think it may have, it's phone systems that then can go speaker and you can announce over. But I'm going to double check for you. And I would agree with you, like, it's kind of like our practices, like we gotta join 2023 here.
Or like using carbon papers.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, no, that's where I was going. Yeah.
Okay, and then your facility improvements, you have any cost on that at all? I didn't see any of that for the flooring and the rugs.
So a flooring, the estimate is about $25,000. Actually, excuse me, $50,000. We think we can do all the floors. He's in the process right now, Mark Wild. That's the figure he's built in terms of asking. We're doing a couple of things, and so we're starting to get bids on that right now. And so I think he's engaged a couple people to give him pricing in terms of what it looks like. Based on the past, what it costs, even most recently at Choxit for the work they did in terms of what it costs for certain square footage, that's how Mark estimated what he thought it would be in terms of that. And then I believe, I don't want to misquote it, but I think the estimates for the generator is that would be somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000. They're pretty expensive. Yeah, they're pretty, and so what they have to do is bid and ground it and things like that. So that is in the process of being built. You have being bid, excuse me, and look at those prices as well. But we wouldn't be coming back and asking for more. If we don't have sufficient money, then we're going to have to make a difficult choice. But right now, we feel like we've properly provisioned to make both those things happen.
Maybe on the generator side of it, you could look to some of your district towns to see if their power companies can help you out with that, you know, as far as getting a better deal. Just a few years ago, we did a generator over at our senior center, and it didn't come close to $150,000. I understand, well, I don't know that your offices are that much bigger than the senior center would be. So, just a thought. But, Christopher, did you want to throw in?
Thank you very much, Ms. Prince. I'm all set.
How about you, Josh?
He's all set too. Thank you.
All right, Michelle,
Are we close to questions? Are you shutting off?
I didn't see your hand being raised.
I raised it earlier and you didn't again.
Yeah, I ignore you. Anything that we haven't discussed already,
Yes.
or do you want to go into Michelle's numbers?
No,
Okay,
it's about the earlier presentation.
okay.
When you overspent your budget, $1.65 million in the preceding year, it's a mystery to me how you can have anything but a deficiency in the following year. So, can you explain how we could possibly end up in the excess condition?
So we had excess revenues that came in last year, and we have to transfer the overspending to those revolving account lines, which aren't taken into consideration. So you have to use your savings to pay for it, to cover.
Where did the excess revenue material?
The excess revenue was mostly our Medicaid reimbursements that I'm aware of. I'd have to dig in a little bit deeper to find out, but we had, like, I believe it was almost like 1.1 million in excess revenues. So I didn't dig in totally. I know most of it is the Medicaid reimbursements.
So you still had a shortfall of about $500K then after you're
Correct.
done?
That's exactly right.
Correct. And we're not quite, I'm not done with FY22 to know that 1.65 million is where we're landing. Right now, I'm seeing less than that. But I won't give a final number until I get all the information into our accounting software to get a real number. So,
My second question was around the PPE that we've had a lot of discussion about. Have you cast forward what your FY24 budget would have that number at? I don't want to look at a 2021 number.
Yeah,
I want to look at a 2024 number.
I couldn't even tell you 22, never mind 23, 24, because that's all based on filing. Those numbers are all based on filing that end of year financial report to DESE, that they take certain function codes to calculate that information.
But you can't even project forward?
Couldn't even tell you. I'd be lying if I even made up a number.
If we knew, we'd tell you.
Yeah.
I think that's a valuable thing to have, is not a 3-year look back on that, but be way more current than that. You know, maybe I would forgive you for a year on it, but
Yeah.
3 years?
In the future, we pretty much, I'm not going to say necessarily, Jim, but I ran out of time. You know, you have to have this done by February 23rd. I was only here a few months. Certainly, it will be way better
Both
next
of you are
year.
new, and I forgive that piece of it, but
Yeah,
we got to get better than that. And
100% agree.
And the last one is about this dot chart that you have here. You have a lot of peers with a similar enrollment, and a lot of your peers are doing a whole lot better. You're down at the very bottom on that. I think it behooves you to understand how your peers, and there's a lot of them with similar enrollments that you have, are having such an advantage in PPE over what Wachusett Regional has. because there's probably stories in here. It's either, you know, it's either a super rich town and they just don't care about their school budget, but I doubt it in every one of these cases that that's the case. And I think it behooves you to analyze these peers and understand how they're doing better. One of the concerns I have,
Joe, that is all we need to talk about now. And I understand what you're saying, and I trust that this will happen in the future. I mean, we've asked about PPEs for years now. We've always been on the lower end of it, and we never know why. I'm hoping that with this soon to be even additional school committee members and Michelle and Jim, that we can move this forward. This is really the first time since I've been on this board that the superintendent has worked hand in hand with our town administrators. You know, so I think that that's a question for get through this budget and immediately start working on the projections for PPEs, why it is so low.
yeah, I know it's not a tonight question, but I think there's some compelling data here that would drive you to want to understand that. I'm kind of thinking that our district has some disadvantages that will be uncovered compared to these other districts.
We definitely, as a district, we don't benefit from some of the funding formulas as much as other districts. We're in this perfect middle where we don't get advantages as much as we perhaps some other towns, whether it be demographics or size. You know, we're not rural enough, we're not urban enough, where we just don't get it. Yeah.
Well, the other thing too, when the state looks at it, just as you said right in the beginning, I mean, Sterling, they look at Sterling and they think, those people got money, we can give them a bigger assessment. You look at the other towns in our district. You have Princeton and Paxton, all notoriously, you know, I mean, since I was a kid, you know, those were the towns you looked at and said, whoa, you know, those people have money. And that's what the state looks at. You know, they look at that, all of our information, and then they come up with this formula. Is it fair? Not sure. I mean, one of my questions was, can we go to the state and advocate for a lower assessment or a better push? Because really, in Sterling itself, our seniors outnumber our students in town at this time. You know, and this is part of the problem, is that the seniors are the ones that are going bald. Look at him.
Their housing values are going up, but their income isn't.
But, so that's kind of a concern, and I don't think that's something that the state actually looks at. And is there a way we can advocate to the state, maybe through our reps, and say, hey, you know, because this is a fact. We said 8 years ago, we knew that the senior population in Sterling was going to outweigh the student population, but yet nothing has changed. The state still comes back and says, oh, you guys got it. I know Joe King, he's got a big, big checkbook. So if you need a check, Michelle, just call Joe. All right, so let's move on to Michelle and,
Murray?
yeah, it's got to be quick.
Well, it's not necessarily quick.
Okay, so then we're going to move on and
But
let
it'll be
Michelle's,
thorough.
well, we're going to move on and let Michelle give hers, and then we can ask more questions,
Okay.
okay? Because John also has a question, I'm not letting him ask you.
No, fine.
She's tough.
Yes.
All right, so I was just going to go through how I actually calculated the budget for you. And the first piece up here, the required local contribution along with your Chapter 70 aid is called the foundation budget that the Commonwealth is basing how many pupils you have, your your per capita income and socioeconomic status. So they're coming up with what your minimum local contribution is going to be. So that is each town's minimum local contribution. I was kind of glad, interestingly enough, that they came up with this on February 23rd, because on February 22nd, as I was trying to come down to some real numbers, we were still using a calculation that Mars did for us, the Massachusetts Association of Regional Schools, because this really affects regional schools the most. when they're calculating this foundation budget, and the calculations were a little bit different. So I was like, oh no, they were a little higher, and I was like, oh no, this is gonna be tough. And then our Chapter 78 came in at $35,851,035. That ended up being over a 10% increase, which was not anticipated as well. We got a big increase compared to most school districts in general across the district. So across the state. So the other piece of, so that's the foundation budget, that $84,952,000. Other things that are, that we have revenues coming in, that Chapter 71, that's the transportation reimbursement, and that was also, I think, over a 10% increase as well. Our charter tuition reimbursement, again, increased as well. It's a small amount. Our Medicaid reimbursement, this is one that I am being a little bit conservative on, because there's some changes in who's going to qualify, students, how they're going to qualify for that Medicare or Medicaid, sorry, not Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement. So, we are anticipating this year to get close to $1 million again, but we're still not sure what the statute's going to do. So, but we have a Medicaid manager who tracks this stuff monthly, quarterly. So that's a little conservative. And then the interest and miscellaneous, because of the time frame, that has remained the same as what was projected in previous year. So there might be some room for some change there, but left it to be conservative for now. Then, being broken out by town, you can see that Sterling, the rest of the budget is based on your student enrollment per town and your percentage that you need to pick up. So Sterling is a 13 point, we went out to several decimal points, but 13.3%. So transportation has, that ending number, the 6.399 million, is net of our transportation reimbursement. And then our debt service, that is based on 2 high school bonds and an oil remediation bond. So that's your portion of that debt service. And that is where we ended with your non-discretionary assessments. That's where it is what it is. I can't change those numbers. I have no ability to do anything with that. That's where it is. So what I did is I went and calculated out how much is this going to cost? How much is it going to cost us to operate the district? I did not add percentages to things. I went and I did, and this came out of the first budget hearing that we had. I went line by line and looked at what we expended for FY22 and FY23. Part of the budget freeze that we did for FY23 was to ask everyone to tell me what you need to spend for the rest of the year, get those purchase orders in, so those monies were encumbered, so I'd have an idea of where we might land at the end of 2023, and looked at those expenses. And that's where the $116,208,797. So interestingly enough, Maureen, I did go back and sharpen my pencil because the spreadsheet didn't save. I had a problem and I had to go back and do it all over again. So that number isn't exactly what it was the first time. And then I had someone who is working with Mars to go back and go through it again with me to make sure that I had it right. So that leaves the 19.298 $663 million of discretionary assessments to come up with your total assessments. So this was an assessment worksheet that I used in a previous district and was provided to us from Mars. And then what I did is I just kind of turned it the other way for what you guys are used to seeing to come up with your town assessments. So kind of just what you were used to see. But I had to start in this direction. So then we have our 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 appropriation areas. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory. Probably the one, just to explain a little, pupil services, it's a small amount, but it deals directly with athletics, health services, and student activities. And then the other operating costs, that is our school choice and our charter tuition or expenses for the kids who are going out, what it cost for us to have those kids going out of the district. And you can see on this, actually, let me just go to the next slide. I did this line by line, and like I said, this came out of the budget hearing that people were like, hey, we want to see a line by line, like, what are you doing? So I went back, and this is actually totals of lines, to be honest with you. There's thousands of lines within these lines. So anyway, one of the things you can see on the line by line, and actually let me just go through it this way. So first, the salary and stipends. What I did is I pulled down everybody that we are currently paying, got them by line, and then went back and updated them as far as like teachers. We have, how many teachers did you say we have?
587.
500 and something teachers. Looked at where they were going to be on those salary scales, elevated them to the appropriate level. We have 7 or 8 units that have not yet come to a final agreement for FY24. So there's a lot of people that we actually, I have a separate line you can see in there that's a couple $1 million. That's for anticipated cost of living adjustments, and it also includes the additional positions that we're having. So there's just one line in there that's just $2 million. That's for anticipated increases. But other than that, every other line is like, this is where they're going to be for the following year. So like you said, 3.86% increase isn't far from what they did last year with their 3%, but that's where we're at. Our benefits and insurance, our health insurance increased by 8.76%. And the other big number in there is our Worcester County retirement went up 6.7%. So that, and then some other insurance pieces went up as well. The instructional support, where you're seeing a big increase there, Jim talked about the Font and Pinellas program that we're going to replace with a new program. That program is not supported by the state anymore, and the new program for first part of implementation, there's a $440,000 cost in there for implementing that new program. So that's where that went up a lot. That line also includes like our copier leases, our technology leases for the new computers. The kids have leased for their Chrome, are they Chromebooks? Is that what they get? Chromebooks. So that's included in there as well. In operations and maintenance, we're seeing an increase there. We included those 2 projects that Jim talked about in a line that's for some big building improvements that's never been included in the past for the carpeting and the generator, and then any other items that have come up. We actually had to do a reappropriation for this fiscal year. We got some grant funding, and we moved money out of the instructional support into that operations and maintenance to do a big project. So we are reappropriated for this year to do a big project because we were able to get some grant funding. So I left that money in operations and maintenance to do that. For pupil services, again, it's a small amount looking like a big percent, but an increase of $15,000 there. So special ed tuitions, you said they went down. They didn't. Special ed tuitions are not going down, not even close to going down. There were a lot of salaries that were funded out of a circuit breaker revolving account that's supposed to be used for special ed situations. So I moved all of those salaries that needed to be there back into that salary line, and the special ed, that circuit breaker funding is going to be used to fund special ed out of district tuitions. So we have a supplement that's going on there. So those tuitions really didn't go down. We're just going to pay for them through circuit breaker. Okay. Transportation, we're in So the other operating costs, that is again, our charter school and our school choice kids going out that we're paying for that. If you look at this line by line, it looks like we had 0 this year. That's one of our problems, that it's since been fixed. But that was an electronic monies coming in and it wasn't recorded, or going out, excuse me. It's monies going out and it wasn't recorded. So they've been recorded now. So transportation, we are in the second year, and I think our final year of extending our contract with AA Transportation. So that's an increase from AA Transportation, and then I actually looked at what it actually costs to send, what we've spent to send the special ed students. So between the special ed transportation and the increase in cost for AA transportation. And then the debt service, like I said, that is the 2 high school bonds and the Jefferson Oil remediation bond. So this is just showing like to show you most of our costs are people and benefits. 80% of our costs, that's where we're at. And then just to see how the revenues went up, so Chapter 78, you can see 10.53%. Chapter 71, which is the transportation reimbursement, went up 10.4%. And then our charter tuition aid, we got an increase as well. Again, it says 70%, but of course the increase is not, dollar-wise, is not hugely significant. Good, but not huge. So the Medicaid, we had anticipated last year $625,000. We're on track to get about, I think she said about $900,000, but I still didn't want to go that far because of some changes in what's happening with those Medicaid, how they're going to be reimbursing us for students in the Medicaid program. And then interest and miscellaneous revenue left the same. Just again, probably ran out of time. I know I need to dig into that a little bit further. And then the E&D, I can't promise it. We are hoping that by the end of April, mid-April to the end of April, we'll be able to get the information provided to the Department of Revenue. How long it will take them for actual certification, I don't know. I still, I have to meet with them tomorrow morning, and I still, I'd love to give them an answer, but I'm not done. I'm not done getting these journal entries into Munis to be able to provide them with. They need a balance sheet and a post-closing trial balance. So that cash piece is huge. So we'll see what happens. No promises. And then just to see where your minimum local contributions, you can see right there, you're starting at a 4.3 increase without me even doing anything else. So that's where those went.
So that'll be like 3.8 by the time you're done?
And then your town assessments, we're at a 4.91% increase. I can tell you if E&D comes through and we can apply that, you will be at your 4%. If we can get, I think I just would have to use $680,000 to get you there. So we're close like that. But I cannot promise, and I don't think we should, I would not want to put forth a budget that isn't based on real numbers. And you're right, for me to go back to the drawing board and okay, where are we going to cut? I don't know.
It's Joe King's big question always.
I don't know. So I think we've already kind of gone over this, and some of these are the same challenges that everybody on this planet is facing. But our increased operating costs, everyone is seeing increases in utilities, health insurance, facilities. And then the other thing that is making it seem like it's such a big increase, it's because I'm trying to base it on real numbers and real expenditures, as opposed to just adding 1% or no percent. So you saw, if you can look at that line by line budget, and you can go down a whole lot of lines and see that those budget numbers stayed the same. and they just changed some numbers. And you can clearly see that salaries were just 3%. There was never any mindful practice of what was it really costing to operate the district, at least for the last couple of years. So, and we're only asking for things that without a strategic plan, we can't ask for things that we can't provide data to support what we're doing or what we're asking for. These are the capital improvement things. So.
Yeah, so we have put forth 2 capital improvement requests for the town of Sterling. They're school security improvements, and so has to do with access control. So that's entry door controls. That's in the key fobs systems. There'd be an alarm system. There'd also be surveillance, and what that would be is there'd be indoor and outdoor cameras, and the police would have access to those cameras, so they could, if they needed to in an emergency, have access to the view both outside and inside the school. The cost estimates for the estimates at Houghton are $59,315, and at Choxet, $55,721. That does not include the $50,000 that we've applied to through the grant. So ideally, that combined number will go down by $50,000 if we're able to get the grant that we've applied for.
This is in our budget now?
We have the $100,000 placeholder in the.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Yeah,
capital.
no, that's in the capital.
Yeah.
It's
The
outside.
ECC is in the actual assessment.
Right.
Yes. So this is just our timeline. We'll see you again on May 1st.
You can come back.
So
Like
how
good
much,
news. 1 minute, Lynn, I do have an overall question. You know, when I look at these numbers and the assessments, not just for Sterling, but for the district itself, how do you see it flying? Because I see pushback.
I have no idea. I don't know. Believe it or not, in our FinCom meeting with Rutland was it last week or was it earlier this week? I'm losing track of time. They were pretty supportive, interestingly enough.
That's good news.
Did you feel that way?
Yes, but I think it's, I think
But you
they
told
have-
them you're going to bring it down to 4%, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, they, just because they have the increase in students, and they really got whacked with their percentage of the minimum level.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're, even when we adjust, they're gonna still be well above, I think 5 or maybe even 6. I think it is hard to tell, I think nobody wants their taxes to go up. I'll be honest, I'm a resident of Holden, I don't want my taxes to go up, and so, I understand all that, and I appreciate the point, Mr. Kilcoyne, that, we have to look at how we're communicating this and make sure people understand, and we're not coming from a position of strength, right? We came in and told you, what we're dealing with, and, right now, we're not offering excess and deficiency, which typically, is supported by school committee and part of the budget. And so, hard to tell. I think we're just trying to be, as open and straightforward as possible, and hope people see that, we're not trying to make things difficult. We are trying to advocate for kids and move this system forward. And ultimately, it's going to be in the hands of the voters and how they do it. And I appreciate the point too. Is like we've got to continue to make sure that we're communicating why we're putting certain things forward, how we feel it's supported, and listen to feedback. I think we're not. I don't want people when they tell us like you should be looking at this, it's not falling on deaf ears. Like we definitely understand that we need to continue to look at how we can make sure we're spending as wisely as possible, and that isn't a thing that I think both Michelle and I have felt like we've had enough time to do. I'm hoping, right, if we have a strategic plan, I come back to you and say, hey, we're really hoping we're going to get those, a guidance counselor in elementary school, and let me show you how we're going to do it, and it's not going to cost you anything, because we found, efficiencies here that are going to defray the cost for what this would cost if we were just adding positions. That's my hope. but we haven't gotten there yet.
On this draft, it says, this is the one for March 2nd, and it says not approved by the school committee, the second round draft.
I'm sorry, did we give you a wrong piece of paper? Oh,
We gave you the ones that we
had,
had, but
yeah.
those are the numbers that
Yeah.
were approved by.
This is the mark, they were,
John, you had it,
yeah, this is, I should
Yeah,
change that.
just a quick question, comment, I guess. Is it fair to say that, I mean, I know these numbers are 3 years old on the per pupil, just to go back to that for a second, but, you know, when you know, the overall budget this year is 116 million, the students are 6739. So that really, is it fair to say that this fiscal year, the per pupil expenditures are $17,210 or?
The calculation that Desi is doing is quite different than the simple calculation that
Okay.
you're doing.
I didn't know how that would
They're
compare to
taking
the
some-
15,000 that's in this
Yeah.
thing. Okay.
It's a complete different calculation. They're actually taking some real specific instructional lines off of the end of year report.
Is it reflective of all our expenditures, or is it just the state-funded part of the expenditures? I guess I've had that question a couple of times also.
I'd have to dig into it a little bit more.
Okay.
I think it's all. I do think
Okay.
they're taking certain function codes off of the end of year report, and it goes from your regular ed, special ed, all through your grants, revolving funds, everything. I think it's all. I'm not gonna. Listen to my words. I think. Like
We can talk later about it, I'm just
yeah.
curious, that's all.
So-
And the only thing, I guess, after hearing the last couple of meetings, hopefully you can cut the number of cash accounts down, bank accounts down from 60 or 70 down to about 5 or under 10. I think that'd save a position on the operations side of this thing for a whole year. So I can't imagine what you're going through reconciling that many bank accounts every month. It's unheard of.
That's why they weren't done.
I know, but that's a good reason.
Just open a new bank account, it seems to be what the thinking was back then. George, you had a question?
I have several.
Yes, sir.
First, do you know why the pupil count that Desi uses and the pupil count we use are different?
That has to do with the.
I mean, significantly.
So they get reports, the pupil count that DESE is using are students we're financially responsible for. So they get those SIMS reports. So I'm gonna mix this up. So if we have a student that is school choiced or homeschooled, we're financially responsible for it. The numbers that we're using are enrollments by town, like students that are in our
The October
towns.
count.
Yeah,
So Desi does not use that.
they have some other ins and outs that they
Because Desi's showing
calculate.
38 more students.
Yeah, and the other piece of that, the paid tuition students are not included in DESE's count. The preschool paid tuition, the kids who are paying tuition to go to,
Desi does not include.
does not include
But
those.
do we, for the October count,
We do.
then our count should be higher than Desi's.
It's the opposite. Our count is low. Yeah.
Considerably lower for Sterling. But anyway, I'll check with
Yeah,
Desi.
and like I said, it also has to do with those charter schools, school choice kids, kids who are going to vocational schools, kids who are homeschooled. So
Yeah, in
they,
the foundation budget, they take all that into consideration. That's a pretty,
correct,
pretty intensive
yeah.
formulation. Just to answer Joe's question about why some of our peers get more money, they also have a factor where towns are more expensive, Joe, that they factor in, you can go up to 105% of the salaries. So we're at 100%. And actually back in 2014, you mentioned going to the state. We did when I was in Princeton, because we were getting shafted. We were paying 100% with no benefit from Chapter 70. And we actually got the formula changed. And we tried to get for the region to recognize that the cost of our staffing out here was actually higher than a normal 100%, and we should have an increase in the percentage, and almost got there, didn't. But that's something you might want to try. I tried to get the school committee to do it back then, and they didn't. So anyway, it's something to look at. If we can get an adjustment, just a 5% increase, that's 5% of $40 million is
That's a lot, yeah.
a lot of money. Yes,
And do you remember what that process was like
the what?
to get that adjustment?
Yeah, actually, it was we met with, I forgot which senator name. She was terrific. She was in charge of the education and the Chapter 70 budgeting back then. And so we were having our discussion with her. It was really a good discussion, but you might want to try that. Now, I do have some questions.
Just one thing,
Was that like 6 years ago?
No, that was back in 15. It was a long time ago.
8 years ago?
Yeah.
Was it Chandler was in charge of the education at that?
She was our senator, right? Yeah.
Well, we had a couple of them.
She was a big advocate of ours because we went through that whole Chapter 70 and the foundation budget calculations and how Princeton was
Right,
getting nothing.
yeah.
And actually, if we had one more student in the school system, we would have paid more than 100%. But be that as it may, yeah, she was terrific, but she was not the one spearheading.
Yeah, Kim Ferguson was part of that discussion too.
Yeah.
Back in the day. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Allocations. One of the things that the district has always pointed out is that we don't spend a lot of money per pupil in relationship to everybody else. I'd just like to point out that somehow over the last 3 years, Sterling has become the most expensive town in our region. Our allocation is $14,409 per pupil. The region is $11,317. So we're spending $3,000 more per pupil than the average in the whole region. Do you know why? That's for 900 students, that's $2.7 million. If we paid the same as everybody else, the 11,317 per pupil, we'd be spending 2.7 million less. Why isn't that spread out evenly?
It has to, again, we're starting with that minimum local contribution from the state. That's their,
Yeah, but
we're starting,
None-
that foundation budget actually comes up with a per pupil cost for the.
Well, that's the minimum, but none of the towns get allocated Chapter 70 money. That comes in a glob to the region. None of the towns have claim to it. Why isn't that utilized to even out the playing field? I don't understand. Well, if you look at it, Rutland's paying $9,400. We're paying $14,000. We're paying $5,000 a student more than Rutland for the same education. We're paying more than Princeton.
No.
But
Well,
that's
we're
part
paying a
of
lot
how,
more than Holden.
that's part of how the regional agreement is written too, when you're taking a percentage of enrollment.
I don't believe it says, it addresses the Chapter 70 funding as how that is going to get allocated. So if that was allocated when it comes in, everybody is at an even playing field, say it's $9,000 per pupil, and then you do your allocations, it would be a lot different. And it's just something, you can't change anything this year. It's just something I wanted to point out because it's been a bane of mine since I lived in Princeton and was going through it when Princeton was the highest. So I moved to Sterling and all of a sudden Sterling's just following me.
Get out of here, George.
It's awful. And the year we moved here, it changed. By the way they figure out the minimum local contribution, needless to say, I spent a lot of time on this, is it's a wealth-based figure. They use the assessed value of the real estate in town, Maureen, remember that, and the Department of Revenue comes up with a income level for the town. And somehow, 3 years ago, and it wasn't due to me, all of a sudden, we became wealthier town than Princeton.
You overpaid for your house.
That must have been it. So, well, that was one question.
We're kind of getting off
We are.
track here, so let's,
I
but
just got a couple more things I want to
something to,
Continue.
after the budget season is over, which is in a couple
We
weeks.
should look at it.
Those are things that we should look at before, next,
I agree.
January or whatever. So,
I just have two more things, real quick.
all right, 2 more questions, no pontificating.
Right.
Just ask the questions, wait for the answer, and move forward.
FY '21 and '22, the deltas they were having in the budgets and everything. Is a lot of that due to the COVID extremis back then? Because that was right in the meat of it. Like when we ran over 1.6 million. I'm sure a lot of school districts had that same problem.
I think so. And again, when we talk about us not being as positioned as well, we also didn't get the benefit of, here in Wachusett, the benefit of some of the funding.
Yeah, I know.
And, so we didn't get the chunks of money other districts did. So they were able to defray some of those facilities costs where we owned more of them. And so that definitely was a piece. And then I'll say the substitute thing was real. We had the requirements where you had to be out for 10 days and then 5 days. And that
It was
took a toll.
horribly expensive.
It really was, and we did one piece of data analysis when we looked at, and I'm not saying that people were inappropriately out at all, but we effectively had 1,000 more absences to deal with between September and December when COVID came, and so it was just astronomical the number of people who were out more often, and it really was because they had no choice; they had to be out for 2 weeks.
Yeah. Now, the last question or comment I have is, when we hire a teacher, there is a benefit package that goes along with the cost. Do you know off the top of your head, or you can send me an email on it, I don't want to take up too much time, what the cost of bringing in a full-time teacher is outside of their salary, just the benefit side? The pension cost, the
So
healthcare
the
cost.
teacher, the pension cost is going to be extremely difficult because that's a reduction in your Chapter 70 funding, because we don't pay direct pension costs to the
No, but
Commonwealth.
we know what it is. It's a percentage of their pay. I have a lot of clients that are retired teachers.
So they pay the deductions, but we don't see an exact, I can get a liability for what we have, but that liability is a liability we're trying to pay off.
It's tens of millions.
That won't get
Makes
paid
sense.
off till like
Okay, just
2035.
focus on the medical insurance.
Okay.
Okay? Because that'll be substantial enough, both family and single. You can send me an email. Thanks
It's roughly 40% of teacher's salary.
for the
The
benefit.
benefits?
I think what he's trying to say is, a family plan is $25,000, and then the
Yeah.
additional small insurance pension stuff is another few $1,000s.
Yeah.
So just under 30 is probably a guess, because that's
So if
about
we
where ours
hire a
is.
teacher for 50,000, it costs 80,
Well, that's what we're predicting.
just like in private enterprise.
We are saying we're hiring a teacher like at a master's level 5, I think, which is about 60, did we say? Master level 5, and then additional $20,000 in benefits, anticipating that some are gonna take family, some are gonna take individual
see.
claims. So we're estimating 80 for a new
Are your
teacher.
8 new teachers in your line item?
They're in the one salary line, it's called like a payroll, like salary reserve
Yeah,
line.
which is the 2,039,000.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks.
All right, Len?
Question for you, I just want to be clear, on the, all of the fiscal year '24 WRHS capital requests are now off the table, the 65,000 for the security, the phone and intercom for 225,000, and, no, I misinterpreted that.
We
So-
have the $100,000 on the warrant for the school security between the two buildings. That may get offset by some of the grant if we get that. And the district ECC and the generator is built into the assessment.
But the high school stuff is
Gone.
all of it, so,
Yeah, no way to No carbon.
And no security at the high school and no
carbon.
Security at the high
The
school.
high school already has a security system,
Well, we'll
correct?
just take that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a great plan.
So those go away. All right, thanks, I just wanted to be sure.
Okay. So, Mr. Austin, anything more?
Thanks.
Sue?
No, I just want some thought given to the town meeting and how we can present a lot of this information.
Okay.
So.
We'll give it some thought. Christopher?
So, thank you. I guess I would just add that this is my 8th year now here in Sterling, and I would tell you that as difficult as this budget conversation has been for us in the district, I have really appreciated the new superintendent's transparency. I feel far more informed about where we are as a district than I ever have. And I don't think there's anything on that list of things that didn't get asked for that we wouldn't argue are really valuable and important and we want. But I also think that if you talk to the 13 principals, we would all agree that the decisions were made in the best interest of our kids across the district. Even if we weren't getting what we wanted, we understood why those decisions were made. And it really has been an enlightening couple of months for me, so.
David? Well, in general, to answer your question, Sue, I think that part of, if you know this, SLCT usually does a presentation with the chair of the finance, the TA, and one of the board members, and I think this should be highlighted on it. I mean, we have our own budget that we have to do, and then we have the school budget, which obviously is pretty much half of our budget, a little bit better than half. I think it's at like 53% or something like that.
Yeah.
School budget versus town budget. So I think that's one avenue to go with. And then probably at town meeting, we could do a slimmed down version of what was presented here tonight. A lot of what we heard tonight is what we heard a few weeks ago as far as the intro, but really the numbers. And probably behoove you to bring somebody like Christopher to the meeting also, when people see a local face. I don't think the budget is outrageous. I think my biggest question is watching how it's allocated. In that, are we using these monies efficiently? And I think that, to me, both personally and history-wise, is a big question. And I think part of that I brought up at the district meeting, seeing, making sure that these people are held accountable, these people that we're paying a lot of money for. Not just teachers, because I never think teachers make enough money, but not just the teachers, but the principals and the administration. I think that's really important to make these people accountable. Look at the mess we're in, because somebody didn't hold somebody accountable. And it starts with us. We should have asked more questions, honestly, as a board, as a town. We trust the people that are in the administration, that they're bringing us facts. Who knew about 60 checking accounts? And that somebody's going to have to walk in and reconcile them. We don't know. So between all the boards in this district and the school committee, we should have probably paid more attention than we did. We trusted the wrong group of people, I'm afraid. So, they were nice guys. They're probably selling cars now. They certainly did a good job with us. What? How many?
Is it possible to post this to our website? We have a little over a month to educate
Yep.
Sterling voters
Good idea, too.
about this. I don't know which section we'd post it on, but if we have permission to do that, it would be valuable to do that in that.
And even though there may be changes as we go down to May 1st, that's right, Michelle, I'm counting on you, honey.
I don't think I can change it. The school committee has already approved it, but
Well, what you really want is to have the finance board have that line on there saying approved, supported by, and the select board supported by, etc. That's what you really need. Now what?
Now,
So mechanics, if you are able to mobilize the E&D and apply it, do we see any adjustment in our quarterly assessment after we vote on this, perhaps on May 1 for the full amount? Will we see an adjustment reduction?
Hopefully
As
we
I
can.
understand it,
Yeah.
if E&D can be certified, if it's certified before May 1, like it could go to town floor and,
Yes.
and,
And be reduced.
and be reduced.
Then we would be voting on
Then-
a reduced budget amount. at
Right,
that point.
yeah.
But
If
what
it
we
doesn't
re-
happen by May 1 and we get it later, then we, school committee would have to approve, and then we could still go back to you and reduce.
The quarterly adjustment.
Correct. Reduce your assessment, and then the quarterlies would change,
Yeah.
so.
And that would become the new baseline for the next year.
But,
And would the town have to vote on that then?
I don't think the town has to vote on it if you're reducing their assessment. I
On-
don't know, that's a good question.
oh, I see what you're talking about, the assessment, but why are we going there when we know we're gonna go to town meeting floor and we're gonna reduce it right then and there?
From your mouth to God's
I was
ear.
just thinking, we love that.
Do you have some extra time on your hands? Because I could use an extra set of hands to get
Let's see, do I have extra time? No. I work full-time myself, so.
So, one more comment.
He's got a lot of time. If you could stand him in your office for 8 hours. Yes, Mr. King?
I think you've done great work and as Chris said, great transparency starting to appear here. The proof of this is going to be next January
Exactly.
because we're going to score you on, you know, the great news is we got all this information now. We're going to use it to score you next year. Okay? So we hope to get answers during the course of the year as a finance committee and as a select board on all the progress you're making and maybe get some progress reports on it.
Michelle, don't be too scared. The advisory board. He's not been elected. No more.
I just want to make a comment. Monty Tech had this, half of the school budget is people. And Monty Tech has a great 5-year picture of full-time equivalent employees in the position that I think is wonderful. I'd love to see the same thing for our school
Well, it
budget.
kind of goes back to Joe, and, you know, breathe, get this done, let's breathe, and then let's get back and see what happens.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you adding
What?
finance to the curriculum this year?
That would be great, because that'd be a great job
One
for
of the
me.
innovation pathways, and because they got that approved, is going to be, trying to think what.
There's a bank, that LCU, is
Which
there?
they may be
Financial
looking
literacy,
at the
yeah.
year after if they get some grant.
Required to issue
Don't you think
a
that'd be a great job for me?
All right, let's stop chit-chatting. Sue, one more comment, that's it?
Just as a member of the school committee, I just want everyone to be assured that under Dr. Riley's leadership, this is a starting point. And throughout the year, we're going to be reviewing the budget. Where are we? Where do we spend our money? What about grant money? We're going to be looking for all kinds of creative opportunities to bring forth a healthier, more robust fiscal picture.
Okay. Sounds like a plan. Anything else, Michelle?
No, thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for yours.
Yes, thank you so much. So with that, I will entertain, or if you want to go first.
I move to adjourn.
Second? Shepherd, second?
Andy in favor?
King eye.
Shepherd, aye.
Austin, I.
All right. That concludes the finance portion of the meeting, and I would entertain a motion that we,
Move to adjourn.
Second.
all those in favor?
Truth, aye.
Grants and I.